Good evening. Thank you for joining us today. We are here to discuss the competency determination policy. In a moment, we will turn on the live interpretation function. When this happens, our Zoom attendees will see a globe that will appear at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This is accessible from a mobile device or a computer. You will also see a pop-up that indicates one or more languages is now available.
Dentro de un momento activaremos la función de interpretación en directo. Cuando esto ocurra, nosotros estaríamos al Zoom, verán aparecer un globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom. Podrán acceder en él desde un dispositivo móvil o una computadora. También verán una ventana emergente que indica que uno o más idiomas están disponibles en este momento.
Boa noite. Daqui a pouco iremos começar a nossa sessão de interpretação. Então, quando você vê que apareceu um globo embaixo da sua tela, você pode apertar, você pode clicar naquele globo, porque aí você pode escolher a língua que você preferir e a tradução vai estar sendo feita simultaneamente.
If you want to listen to this next portion in Portuguese, you will click the globe and choose Portuguese. When you do that, you should be able to hear the voice of our Portuguese interpreter. If you want to listen to this next portion in Spanish, you will click the globe and choose Spanish. When you do that, you should be able to hear the voice of our Spanish interpreter.
Si desea escuchar la siguiente parte en español, haga clic en el globo y elige español. Cuando lo haga, podrá escuchar la voz de nuestro intérprete en español para que este segmento de la reunión.
Caso você queira escutar essa reunião em português, é só clicar no português e o seu intérprete estará traduzindo tudo em português.
So this is our competency determination policy presentation. Tonight we have with us the principal of Framingham High School, Mr. Mark Albright, and I am Ann Ludis, Assistant Superintendent for Pre-K through 12 Education. Our screen sharing is working again, so that's great, or is working now. So above and beyond the courses that are listed there, the departments and the course credits that are listed, you need to earn the 22 credits, and in your senior year of high school, you have to be enrolled in 5 credits, or the equivalent of 5 classes at a time. But above that, the state also has its own requirements, which is called the competency determination. And that competency determination is basically a baseline measure of success or academic readiness. And that was in the past determined by the MCAS test. And so that test would cover the subjects of English language arts, mathematics, and science. And so to meet the competency determination required by the state in order to earn a diploma, you would take and pass those MCAS assessments. Sometimes students would need more than one opportunity to pass the test. And so they would take that test first in 10th grade, and then if they needed to, again in 11th grade or even in 12th grade. And that was how students met the competency determination in the past. Then in November of 2024, there was a ballot initiative, and in that ballot question came up the question of whether or not taking the MCAS test should count toward graduation requirement, if that should be required. And the answer was no, by the vote. And so what ended up happening after that was that the way that language was written forced the state to put new requirements into place based on the language in that ballot question. And that's where we are today with the new policy that is required as a result of that ballot initiative. So just to kind of go through what's happened. So before that ballot initiative, so prior to the class of 2025, this ballot initiative was in November of 2024. So for the class of 2024 and earlier, the the MCAS was all you needed to do above and beyond the graduation requirements from the high school. For the class of 2025, after that ballot initiative took place, districts had to determine their own requirements and add them to the program of studies. This was done last year and presented to the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee of the school committee, as well as the full school committee. But at the time, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education had not had a chance to fully develop the guidelines and requirements for this competency determination. So the class of 2025 had, I would say, less restrictive or less standardized requirements because they hadn't yet been fully outlined by the state.
And I
But
think
in
I think one of the important points to make here in regards to last year's graduation requirements is what we did as a district, and we met with a lot of other neighboring districts and other districts in Massachusetts to really talk out what is it going to look like, what's the process, what do we think is coming next, and we aligned our graduation requirements actually exactly with what the coursework that is being requested for a piece of the competency now, which is the English 1, English 2 courses you'll see about later, the specific math courses of Algebra 1 and Geometry, and the lab science. So we last year sort of saw this coming, and part of that conversation that we had with the school committee, but also with the Office of Teaching and Learning, with our faculty and staff here, and with neighboring districts was, let's make sure we get ahead of this and that we have a setup that puts us in a really good position for whatever comes next and whatever they decide. And that really is the building blocks of what we're talking about today and sort of adding that additional layer on. So while they didn't provide a lot of guidance, we as a district and we as a community put the time in and put the effort in to make sure that we were aligned with what we believed that they would put out next, and it in fact is exactly aligned with that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Albright. And so with the information that the district had and that Framingham High School had, the competency requirements for the class of 2025 were exactly what they should have been. But in July, the state came out, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education came out with fully aligned requirements based on the language in that ballot referendum. And so that's why it's a little bit more complicated now, but it is not going to be really much of a change in practice from the way the high school currently operates. And so before I even get into what's happening for the class of 2026 and beyond, I do want to make note that if a student took the MCAS test prior to January of 2025 and passed, they met the competency determination for that particular subject. So if a student took the ELA, the math, and the biology MCAS test in the spring of 2024 and passed all three, they've met, and they're in the class of 2026, they've met their competency determination requirements. They're done. This is really, the policy is specifically to address how any student moving forward who has not already met the competency determination must meet the competency determination. So this is really just about who hasn't yet met the competency determination. There are some in the 12th grade who haven't yet. There are some in 11th grade who have not yet. And for most other students, they haven't yet because the MCAS did not exist for them. So what we're looking at is which of those students are impacted now and what are the things that they need to do in the short term. So we've got a few considerations that we've put in place specifically for the students who are in 12th grade and even for some of our students in 11th grade to take into consideration the fact that this policy is taking effect when they're already more than halfway through or even almost finishing their high school career. So we'll explain that as we get through these slides as well. But let me explain now that for the class of 2026 and beyond, we have had to develop our own competency determination policy. And we cannot use MCAS as the measure for competency determination moving forward. But again, students who passed the MCAS prior to January of 2025 met the competency determination. According to the state, they've met that competency determination for that particular subject. What we need to do as part of this new regulation is determine which subjects or which courses in the subjects that are tested by MCAS are aligned to the subjects that are tested. So, for example, the math assessment is an algebra and geometry based MCAS assessment. And so we have to identify all of the courses that align to the algebra and geometry standards. And so we had to do that with all of the different MCAS tested subjects, the ELA, the math, and the science. And starting for the class of 2027, U.S. history is also going to be included. And so that's why you see the bullet there that talks about U.S. history beginning with the class of 2027. An additional change is that this is not just about taking courses. It's not just about the list of courses and passing those courses and earning full credit. It's also about demonstrating mastery, which needs to be something different than or separate from just completing a course and earning credit. So we'll talk about what the high school will be doing shortly. So again, taking a look at what has changed. Prior to the class of 2025, you had to pass MCAS in ELA, math, or science, one of the sciences, biology, chemistry, or physics. Class of 2025 lacked some specifics from the Department of Ed, but we came up with our own policies. And class of 2026 and beyond, MCAS aligned subjects, we need to determine our own competency determination measures for those particular subjects, as well as U.S. history for the class of 2027 and beyond. At this point, I don't want people to think MCAS is no longer important. It is a very, very important assessment for the Framingham Public Schools because it weighs very, very heavily on our accountability data and our percentile ranking with the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We use that data. It drives instruction. It helps us identify which areas in particular subjects might need additional reinforcement. It helps us determine if we are properly serving students with disabilities, multilingual learners, and other subpopulations of Framingham Public Schools. And again, it really does tie into accountability. In fact, it's not just about the MCAS achievement, it's also about participation in the assessment itself. If we do not have enough students participating in the assessment, then we can be cited by the state, and then that can hurt our accountability ratings as well. So I just needed to take a moment to explain that piece, because while MCAS is no longer a graduation requirement, it still is very, very important to Framingham High School and to the district as a whole. So we've talked a lot about this. I'm not going to really harp on this slide too much more, except that on the red box on the right-hand side, notice what is different about what the policy must have. This is really about the requirements for the policy now. Competency determination is district defined. We have received explicit guidance about what needs to be included, including that demonstration of mastery, and we have to define an appeals process. We also have to look at how we're specifically supporting multilingual learners and how we are supporting transfer students as well as students with disabilities. And again, class of 2027 and beyond, U.S. history is going to be an additional requirement. So there are different pathways that can get students to that graduation requirement of the competency determination. For the class of 2026, let's start with the class of 2026, those students who are planning and hoping to graduate this coming spring. You must meet the competency determination requirement in all 3 subjects, English Language Arts, mathematics, and one of the sciences, biology, chemistry, or physics. That can happen by passing MCAS prior to January of 2025 or going through FHS's new process, which includes earning full credit in qualified courses and demonstrating mastery by doing one of the following two things. You either earn a final grade of 70 or higher in a course you've already taken. So if you took geometry last year as an 11th grader and you're a senior this year and you earned a 75 in that class, because it doesn't make sense to give you a final assessment to test your mastery now when you finish that class last year, we are using a 70% final grade as a cutoff for the demonstration of mastery. This is only for classes that were completed prior to the start of this school year, or prior to September 1st of 2025. So if you are taking a class this year, that final grade of 70 as a determination of mastery will not count, okay? That will only count for classes that you took in the past. For classes that you're taking now, or for somebody who did not earn a 70% or higher on the final grade, you must complete a final assessment, a portfolio, or a project and earn a grade of 60 or higher, 60% or higher.
And
so, for example, go ahead, Mr. Albright.
And just as a point of reference, so you can get a sense of the scope of what we're talking about here, all of the students in the class of 2026 that have met graduation requirements in regards to competency, right, for either MCAS or the 70 grade or higher, we're already we have a class of 485 as of today. We already have 419 students who have met graduation competency in the class of 2026. So we're really talking about fewer than 70 students that we need to be able to make sure we're providing the support for in regards to the final assessment, portfolio, and project, or any students that may move in, between now and the end of this senior year as seniors. So just to get a sense of where we're talking about, nearly, over 85%, 86.4% of our students have already met this requirement for the current senior class. So we're talking about a small population of students that we can provide very targeted support for once the policy is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Albright. And if a student is currently taking a class that they need in order for that competency determination, then they will, at the end of the course, have an opportunity to complete a final assessment, a portfolio, or a project. Now, I want to talk about the final assessment, okay? The final assessment is not the final exam that is taken and going to be applied to the report card. This is a baseline standardized assessment that will be given to any student who needs the competency determination for that course, regardless of the level of course they're taking, whether it's honors, ACP, CP. Students will take that same baseline assessment, and that will be our measure of competency. So earning a 60 or higher on that assessment is all that is required. And again, in certain circumstances, a portfolio or a project may be this is all still being developed by the high school, but that may be a different pathway that can be taken for individual students or for a particular course. Okay. For the class of 2027 and beyond, so students who are currently juniors or younger, sophomores, freshmen, or coming into the high school, there are now going to be 4 subjects that are required. And those 4 subjects are the English Language Arts, the math, one of the sciences, and U.S. history. And this again is achieved by passing MCAS prior to January of 2025, which there is no U.S. history MCAS assessment that was taken. So U.S. history has to be managed through the other FHS process. And that can happen whether it's just the U.S. history or it's all the subjects or some combination. That will happen by earning full credit in the course, passing the course, earning full credit, and demonstrating mastery, which for a course that they have taken in the past will be earning a 70 or higher in the course. And for courses where they didn't earn that 70 or higher, or for courses that are taken moving forward, so this year and in the future, taking that final assessment, a portfolio or a project, and earning a grade of 60 or higher. You might have the question, why is the final grade of 70 in the past for a final grade of a course? Why is that higher than the grade on that final assessment? And that's because we recognize mastery is harder to measure in a final grade over a year-long course when there are all sorts of factors that play into that, including besides tests and quizzes and projects. Sometimes it's homework, sometimes it's class participation. So we wanted to make sure we were measuring mastery in a more comparable way to what might be in a final assessment, portfolio, or project. So we have raised that standard for the final grade for courses that have been completed prior to September 1st. Then we are moving forward. Evangelia, do we need to make another announcement?
Yes. We have one more person just joined us. Si desea intérprete en español, favor de dejarnos saber en la sección que dice Q&A, que es para preguntas y respuestas. Tenemos unos problemas técnicos con los salones para traducción en intérpretes.
Okay, I will keep
We're
going.
all set. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so how did we develop this policy? It's been a long process that started this summer with reviewing the policy requirements when they were released by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We participated in a webinar that was hosted by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education specifically about this competency determination policy. We participated in an urban superintendent network meeting that was hosted by Rob Curtin, who works for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, and whose job really is to oversee all of this data related to this work. We've consulted with professional networks. We have collaborated and had discussions with FHS administration besides Mr. Albright here. We've spoken with the Framingham High School Academy programs, the day and evening programs at Thayer with their coordinators. We've talked to the high school department heads, the Department of Multilingual Education, the Department of Special Education, and even had a separate meeting specifically with the out-of-district coordinators and school counseling to make sure that we were taking into consideration all of the different students that we are trying to serve through this policy, with the goal of making the policy as flexible as possible so that all students can meet that standard, that requirement to earn a diploma. So that is our goal, is to help all students have as much success as possible in earning that competency determination. As far as communication, this was shared with the Framingham High School School Council. Thank you, Mr. Albright, for that. And as well as with the PTBO. Again, thank you, Mr. Albright. And the FHS faculty, thank you, Mr. Albright. And this has been part of the school committee. It was included, a warning that this was coming was included in a school committee memo back in August. This was presented at a teaching and learning subcommittee meeting, also at a policy subcommittee meeting, and has already gone through a first reading with the school committee. The second reading with the school committee will be tomorrow evening. And there have been several Parent Square communications that have gone out to the entire district, all students, staff, and caregivers. And in those, we included links to the draft policy, links to the subcommittee presentations, and so on. Trying to get the word out. We know that it's going to take more time to educate everybody and inform everybody about all of these changes. And this webinar is another way that we are trying to help people understand. As I mentioned earlier, there are some considerations that were required as part of this policy beyond just what are the courses and how are they students going to demonstrate mastery. In addition to that, we have to specifically focus on what are we doing to support students with IEPs and multilingual learners. And so here is some of the language that is in our policy regarding students with disabilities. And you'll see that it involves ensuring that students in out-of-district programs will not be harmed in any way because their schooling is not happening at Framingham High School, as long as their end of course assessments are aligned with state frameworks, the curriculum frameworks in the specific subjects, then we will accept those end of course assignments from those out of district schools the same way that we would from Framingham High School. So regardless of their out of district placement, as long as we get that information, those students will take those into consideration for their competency determination. Also, competency determination must be discussed as part of the IEP team's transition planning. That's another key feature moving forward. That does not mean that meetings that have already taken place need to reoccur. What it does mean is that moving forward, that conversation needs to be a part of the transition planning. For multilingual learners, coursework will be looked at and analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And of course, the goal is to achieve language proficiency while also meeting the competency determination requirements. And so there are times where some of our courses that are not listed in that policy, including our ESL 1, 2, or 3 courses, might be determined to meet the competency determination requirements if the coursework that the student has accomplished, has completed, aligns with the state frameworks for English language arts. And that will be something that Mr. Albright and his team review on a case-by-case basis.
And can I chime in just on a quick piece here?
Yeah.
One thing that's really important to recognize as well as we talk about this process, it sounds and feels like a lot, but at the end of the day, if a student comes through Framingham High School, plans their courses as they would normally to meet graduation requirements, they're going to automatically have all of the courses that we're talking about here built into their schedule. So they don't need to do anything significantly different. They just need to be able to take those courses and then take an additional competency assessment portfolio or project at the end of that course that they would already be scheduled to take. So it's really just a matter of making sure that the students are engaged, that they're coming to school, that they're in attendance, and that they're handling their regular business as a student here at Framingham High School. And the rest of this policy is going to take care of itself. It sounds like a lot because we're presenting it for the first time as a policy, but at the end of the day, don't worry. Your kids are going to be okay. They're going to come here. We're going to work with them. They're going to do their jobs and they're going to get their high school diplomas as long as they're here every day doing the work and being part of that process. So I just want to sort of, it's a lot, but every once in a while, I think it's okay to step back from it and say, it's a lot, but it's already baked into our process. It's already what we do so that there's not a lot of extra. There's no additional other than the one competency assessment that will happen at the end in the spring of each of the courses.
And thank you, Mr. Albright. We do have a question in the Q&A, and I'm going to address it now because it's related to something that we've already talked about recently, and just in the last couple of minutes. And that is for the students who have already completed a course prior to September 1st, and we're using that to try and count as competency, meeting the competency requirement for that particular subject. So for example, it could be chemistry or biology. And the question is, why are we using 70% as the cutoff? Could we lower that to say 60% because that's a passing grade for a subject? And they're saying, please consider our most vulnerable populations, particularly students with disabilities and multilingual learners. And I'm going to go back to the policy itself says we need to differentiate between satisfactorily completing a course, which is earning the credit and passing the course, and mastery, demonstrating mastery. Moving forward, we need to make sure that we're doing something above and beyond just completing a course. So because that 60% completing a course isn't considered a demonstration of mastery. That's why they've added on this additional piece of a demonstration of mastery. Simply earning credit, according to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, earning credit in a course they do not feel meets mastery. So we needed to do something to distinguish completing the course while using the course grade as the demonstration of mastery. originally when Mr. Albright and I were trying to figure out and work with others from the high school, trying to figure out how we were going to overcome this hurdle of all of these students who maybe took geometry last year and now won't be able to use MCAS moving forward just based on the timing of their MCAS assessments. Were we going to have all of them take an assessment or complete a portfolio or a project? And we said that's just unreasonable and not fair. So what we did was we said, well, where's that compromise between setting that bar at 60%, which the state has said is not acceptable, that there needs to be mastery above and beyond just earning the final grade. So where is that compromise between that and just making every student participate in an extra assessment? And so that's where we came up with the 70%. For students who earned a 65 or a 61 or a 60 and passed the course but didn't meet that 70% threshold, there will be opportunities to complete a project, a portfolio, or an assessment later on this spring for students who are seniors, and in the future for other students who need it that are identified in the classes of 2027 and beyond. There will be opportunities to do that. So that is coming. That is work that is being developed by department heads and their teams in those specific subjects. So that is coming, and the high school will work with those individual students to connect them to the right resources that they need. So this is, we're walking a fine line and trying to do everything that we can to be as flexible as we can within the requirements. Thank you. Okay. All right. So this is also another tough one. Framingham has a lot of students that come into the district later in their schooling. And at Framingham High School, we get a lot of transfer students. And so how are we going to help those students who also need to meet the competency determination? And if they've come from another state and they didn't have all of these different policies in place like Massachusetts now has, how are we going to ensure that we're treating those students fairly as well? So we have a process for that, as you can see here. This is all outlined in the policy itself. And again, for transfer students that are coming from another district, if they took MCAS, that's the easiest pathway for anybody. But if they haven't done that, then they're going to we'll look at a coursework review and look at, assessments as needed. One thing that's really, really important that Mr. Albright insisted, didn't take much convincing on my part, but we talked about and he was very passionate about, was that we want to make sure that we treat students fairly and give them every opportunity to continue with their high school career with as little disruption and as little additional work as possible. And the reason I say that is because prior to this new policy taking effect, MCAS used to be the competency determination across the state. If a student transferred from Lawrence to Framingham High School or from Framingham High School to Lawrence, if they'd passed MCAS, they met the competency determination because it was the same for any high school in Massachusetts because it was determined by the state. Now, individual schools and districts are developing their own policies. And we don't want students who have a different policy in another community in Massachusetts transferring to Framingham and feeling like they have to start over and now meet our competency determination policy. So we have added language to the policy that says that we will honor the competency determination requirements of another district in Massachusetts. So if a student does come from Waltham to Framingham, and they have already met the competency determination standards set by Waltham, we will honor them at Framingham High School. There's no need for the student to start over. Go ahead, Mr.
One other piece we're doing is we're going to be working on redeveloping and updating our transcript records so that we can note students that have completed competency here. So if they in fact have to move somewhere else, it'll be noted on their transcript in a way that will allow other districts determining their own policies on how to accept those, but they won't have to search for it. It'll be something that we think is important enough to include right on the transcript, met competency in ELA, math, or science. So that'll be something we're looking to add 4 transcripts for this current senior class and beyond.
And, we also recognize, though, that maybe not every school or district in the Commonwealth is thinking ahead that way. So we will certainly honor just a letter on school letterhead that says that, Mark Albright has earned the competency determination in mathematics and ELA, and we'll honor that as well. So it does not need to be that it's on their transcript. Any school documentation that they can provide that says that they've met the competency determination will be satisfactory to us. Okay. Appeals. There is an appeals process. So students, for current students, say they have not met the competency determination and they want to appeal. They submit their appeal in writing. A committee reviews it. A decision will be issued in writing within 10 business days. And there's an appeal to the superintendent or their designee if they disagree with the outcome. For students who have graduated from Framingham High School but didn't earn a diploma, so they earned a certificate of attainment instead. That would be students from the class of 2003 to 2024 when MCAS was a graduation requirement, a diploma requirement. They are eligible also to file an appeal. They need to have been previously enrolled in Framingham. They need to have met all of the criteria for that certificate of attainment. So all of those graduation requirements, course credits, they just didn't pass the MCAS. And they also cannot be listed as having been a graduate, pardon me, of any other district. Mr. Albright, I'm going to let you continue.
Sure. So when we look at this and we talk about that process, one of the things that we did for the most recent graduating class of 2024 is when we had our policy and our protocols in place last year, we were able to go back and look at the class of 2024 and see how many students were not able to meet competency based on the MCAS policy as it stood previously. And what we were allowed to do and what we were able to do and supported by the state was to review that. And just as a sense of numbers, we had 75 students in the class of 2024 who initially had received certificates of attainment out of graduating class of around 550 or so. And for those 75 students, upon further review, looking at the policy and going through the appeals process, we were able to issue an additional 50 diplomas to those students. So we really had under 25 or so students that had received a certificate of attainment and not a high school diploma out of the over 550 graduates. So that process is in place. We have that system in place. We're happy to review anybody from previous graduation years that did not receive a diploma. For more recent graduates, 2023, 2024, we did direct outreach to those families and students to provide them with the information as to how to go about that process. So that's something certainly that's available based on the shift in policy and the shift in law from the state.
Thank you, Mr. Albright, for helping me out there. One other very important point is that if somebody from the class of 2024 or prior does file an appeal, they need to meet the current requirements, not the requirements from the year that they earned their certificate of attainment. So if they graduated in 2023 and they file an appeal in 2027, they're going to need to meet the requirements of 2027, not 2023. It's just a very important point, so just be aware of that. Next steps, we're going to continue communicating with students, caregivers, and just really try to get the word out. This is going to be an ongoing process. We know that this is very different and very new, but we really do hope that you feel that this isn't really going to be much of a change. Students are going to take a course. At the end of the course, they're going to complete a project or a baseline assessment or a portfolio, and that's going to be used to determine whether or not they've met competency. Obviously, for students, maybe not obviously, let me state it clearly. For students who don't pass that project or that assessment at the end of the course, they will have further opportunities to retake that assessment or rework that portfolio or project. We want students to be able to meet the competency determination to the best of their ability. This is not in any way meant to be a barrier. This is meant to just do what we need to do in order to meet this requirement.
And I think, and one other important point as we sort of wrap this up, it's important to note that these competency assessments, portfolios, or exams, they do not factor into the student's transcript and they do not factor into a student's GPA. So they are a separate assessment that is really truly to determine competency yes or competency not yet. So at the end of the day, it's important to note that as we work through this process and we develop these exams, it is not something that will impact their final grade in that course. It's not something that will impact their transcript or their GPA. It really is what becomes a yes or a no ultimately for graduation in regards to ELA, math, and science. And really, it's not a yes or a no. It's a yes or a not quite yes, but we'll get there.
As you have already heard, and is evidence from Mr. Albright's earlier comments, there's going to be ongoing review and support for the students in the class of 2026 that need to meet this competency determination still. That work is ongoing and will continue. There's still more planning to do and more collaboration because again, we're not done. This is just the beginning. And so this is going to be something that is just continues to work with school counseling, multilingual education department, special education department heads. Everybody is going to be involved in the development of like the execution of this policy and of course the development of the end of course assessments and projects and portfolios. We have purchased an exam scorer for the end of course assessments to make it easier, particularly for the times that you have to that there are multiple opportunities to take an assessment. So this will make it much more efficient for us to give students feedback as quickly as possible so that they have multiple opportunities to do what they need to do.
For those of you that think that an exam score is a person, it is a software. And if you flash back to your school days,
Scantron,
Scantron and things like that will allow us to be able to consistently collect data and assess those tests in a much more efficient manner.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, yes. An exam scorer is a software tool. And at that point, that's the end. We have finished. So if there are any further questions, I think there are. Hold on, I see a couple of, gotta get my mouse on the right screen. Are students with disabilities that are scheduled to receive a certificate of attainment for 2026 eligible to receive a high school diploma? It's a very great, go ahead.
So for students that were MCAS alt students or students that were not in line to be able to receive a diploma because they were not participating in MCAS based on the level of disability, those are separate conversations individually to sort of see where they're at. I will tell you that some students in our Learning Center program have received diplomas, even received diplomas last year with MCAS as one of the graduation requirements. So really for those students, it's going to be an individual assessment and based on what we see in regards to their coursework. But to receive a diploma, the requirements for competency will be in place, and the expectations are that the students will meet that. Sorry, I'm not sure if you wanted to add more, Anne. Sorry.
No, that was excellent. And I think, anytime if you have any questions, the most important thing you could do is reach out to your school counselor, vice principal, whoever you have that relationship with, Mr. Albright, of course, and speak about the specifics to your situation. We really encourage that. I'm happy to answer questions as well. Obviously, I have less knowledge about individual students, but I can certainly talk. I feel like Mr. Albright and I have been living this policy since the guidelines were released this summer. So I can certainly speak more in more detail about any aspects of this policy that anybody would like. I don't see any more questions, Mr. Albright.
I am okay with that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate you taking the time to be here, and we wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks.